In Chapter 7, we look at the difference between a while loop and a for loop. Generally speaking, for loops are used when you have a definite range that you want to go through. While loops are used when you want to test a condition. While loops can be used for loops. First example here, we're going to look at an example we've seen before where we sum up the integers from 1 up to a given integer. In our particular case, we're going to look at the sum of the numbers from 1 to 10, and we're going to do it in two different ways, using a for loop and using a while loop. So for the for loop, we call for loop, we pass it the variable n as an argument or a parameter, and then for loop comes in, starts off with a sum that is 0, and for the integers in the range from, in this case, from 0 up to n, given the way that range works, we are going to take sum and add to it the next integer. So when I is 0, it just adds 0 to 0. When I becomes 1, we add 0 to 1 and get 1. And then the next step through, I becomes 2, and we add 2 to the 1 we already have. Next step through, I becomes 3, and we add 3 to the sum we already have, which is 2 plus 1, and so on, up until I becomes 10, and then it finishes. And then we return sum back to the calling program. So for loop is a function, not a procedure. Back in the original program, we then print that so we can see the result, which we hope to be 55. A while loop works similarly. We're going to start off again with a sum that's 0, and we're going to have the same sort of structure, but in this case, we're going to control the index I ourselves. For loops automatically control I. In this case, if we're going to use a while loop like a for loop, we have to set it up. So we're going to start off at 1, not 0, as it up here in range. And then we're going to test while I is less than or equal to n. And we're going to do the exact same command we had up above. We're going to add I to the current sum. So this is just like what we did in the for loop. The only difference is down here we have to add 1 to our index I ourselves inside the while loop. The for loop does that automatically. Every time it's done executing the code inside the for loop, then it indexes or it increases the index variable by 1 for us, or whatever step size you put in here. So, and then when we're done with that, we will return sum back to the calling program. So this while loop does the exact same thing as the for loop. We have to then take care of the index variable ourselves, and we set up, in this case, a condition while I is less than or equal to n. So while loops take conditions like an if statement does. Similarly, this is a function like for loop, so we return a value back to the calling program, which then we are going to print. And then we're going to run this, and in both cases we get 55. The while loop can be used for more general setups. If you can, programmers tend to use for loops because they're simpler, but there are some conditions where it's just nicer to use a while loop. So this is a variation on the summing of the integers. In this case, instead of summing up the integers less than a given value n, what we're going to do is we're going to take an integer and then figure out what is the largest integer whose sum is less than that. So I have an example up here at the top. If you take 16 and pass it to largest int, it goes in and checks that the sum 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 is less than 16, but if you add one more term onto that sum and go up to 6, that's greater than 16. So 5 is the largest integer whose sum is less than 16. So largest int of 16 should return 5. So here's how that works. We start off with our index variable is 0. This is part of the counting process. The sum is going to be 0, and I played around with this, starting it at 1 and 2. You're seeing the finished product here. So I did test this code to get it to work. We start off the sum at 0, and then in this case, we want to know that the sum is less than n. So if the sum is less than n, then we increase the index by 1, and then we add it into the sum, and we just keep doing this until the sum is less than n, and then when we're all done, when the sum is actually greater than n, we've gone one too far, so we return I minus 1. And then down here, this is a function, so we're going to print off largest 16. The thing that I think is important here is this idea that with a while loop, we have this condition that we can test. Test to see if the sum of the numbers we have is less than the thing that we've passed in. So in this case, we're going to pass in 16, and we're going to keep summing up these numbers. 1 plus 2 is 3, that's less than 16. Keep going, add 3, you get 6, that's less than 16. Add 4, you get 10, that's less than 16. Add 5, you get 15, that's still less than 16, so the sum will, this while loop will execute one more time. Add 6, and they'll get 21, say, oh, that's greater than 16. And at that point, I will be 6, and then we will return 5. So let's run this. Sum less than. And we find out that the largest number whose sum of digits less than or equal to it is less than 16 is 5. I think I said that right, but I guess you get the idea. We could try this with something like 100. So the sum of the digits up to and equaling 13 is less than 100, but if you go 14, then you get the sum of digits is more than 100. Okay, one more example. This is a typical kind of thing that a programmer might do, is to set up a menu. So we're going to print off a menu and ask the user what it wants. This is a pretty general setup. In this particular case, we're going to get quotes from Lord of the Rings. So we're going to ask for a Saruman quote, a Bilbo quote, and a Gandalf quote. So look how this works. We print off the menu, and there's 4 choices: Saruman quote, Bilbo quote, Gandalf quote, and exit. We ask the user to input their choice, A, B, C, or D. They could put in a lowercase. We're going to count that too. So what we're going to do is take whatever they input, convert that to an uppercase. So remember that an input is going to be a string. And as a string, we can convert it to uppercase using .upper. It's a neat little trick. If you want to learn that trick, then just remember we can use .upper. There's actually going to be a section or a whole chapter on strings where we're going to see more of this. But this is just a neat little trick, kind of looking ahead a little bit. We check to see that they've actually inputted A, B, C, or D. And if they do, all we do is take their choice and return it back to the calling program. So this function right here, all it does is put up a menu and make sure that the user inputs a proper choice. If it doesn't, it prints you must choose A, B, C, or D. And then the part I skipped up here is there's a while loop up here running this menu program that says while true. If you don't do anything else, this while statement will run forever. This is an infinite loop. While true is always going to be true, so this code will just keep executing. So how do we get out of this infinite loop? Well, we get a proper choice from the user, and in that case, we do a return statement. And as soon as you execute a return statement, you exit the procedure. So this whole thing will stop running, menu will be exited, and you'll go back to the calling program. Okay, so this loop is in an infinite loop until the user puts in a proper choice. And this is procedural programming. The idea that, well, in this case it's a function, but procedural programming, that you break tasks up into smaller pieces. So at this point, we're just checking that the user has inputted a proper choice, and then we'll have something else make a decision as to what to do with that choice. And in this particular case, the procedure that makes use of the choice is do user's choice. So I think that's a fairly descriptive name. And all do user's choice does is, if they choose A, it calls Saruman for a quote, so it's another procedure. And if the user chooses B, it calls another procedure Bilbo, and the other choice possible, if you get this far, is it calls Gandalf. There was a fourth choice to exit, but that has to be handled down below in the main loop. Okay, so and you can see the procedures up above that just print the quotes out. Those could be, more complicated procedures if you had a more complicated program, but for this is just illustrating how a menu might work. Okay, so this is the main program down here. So we start off by asking for a choice from menu. So remember, menu will print off a menu, a list of options, 4 options, and this will return the value that the user inputs. And as long as the user inputs something other than D, we will go up and do user's choice, and then we'll come back down and get their next choice. So this menu is just going to keep running over and over and over again until the user chooses D. Okay, so let's run that standard menu. And you can use this standard menu to build on other things. So let's try, you could build a more complicated program from this, but this is the outline of what a standard menu looks like. So we'll try S. So it says you must choose A, B, C, or D. You could try exclamation point, Timmy. Same thing, just you must choose A, B, C, or D. We can try a lowercase a. And remember what's going to happen. So if we choose a lowercase a, up here, it's going to take that lowercase a, convert it to an upper, which will give an uppercase a, and then so this if statement will be executed, and it's going to return a down here, and we will see what happens. So if we return a, well, actually, I'm sorry, we return the uppercase version of this. So I guess I skipped that detail. We're returning the uppercase. So this way, by returning the uppercase, procedures or functions or main programs or whatever that call menu know what to expect. It's always going to get back a capital A, a capital B, a capital C, or a capital D. So this procedure takes care of all the error checking and that kind of stuff for us. So back in the main program, we just have to check A, B, or C, or D. Okay. So let's see. I chose a Saruman quote. You have elected the way of pain. Probably better counter that with a Gandalf quote, capital C. And finally, we can exit by choosing lowercase d. And process finishes with exit code 0. That's what we always want to see, exit code 0. That means that no errors happen.